Welcome back to part two of me talking to Geraldine Matus. I still need to learn to pronounce that. I am so happy to have you back, Geraldine.
Thank you, Ellie. I'm happy to be back. And it's Matus, just simple
Matus.
Matus.
You told me it's Latin, so
Hmm.
and
Straight up
Romanian
Latin.
is a Latin language, but in Romanian I would say Matus.
Ah, yes.
So, and today we're going to talk about the revolution. And that was actually one of the main insights I had after I rewatched our interview. I don't want to say this topic because there are so many topics, but this specific area, I guess, is so important to me uh, that I cannot believe I am not more revolted and more driven for a revolution in this area. I worked when I started at Justice, I worked a lot like processing my anger to the system that I was working in at the time. And I've realized relatively recently that my processing my work fine, it led me into channeling it into what I'm doing. But on the other hand, it was also kind of like the patriarchal just put a lid on it. So I wanted to ask you a little bit about how we actually stop suppressing our inner revolutionary and actually own that this is, I guess, a torch that we in my generation have to carry on. How do we own that? How do we, I don't want to say release the fear because I understand that we're going to feel the fear and have to do it anyway. But my question is, I guess, what was your process in all of this? How did you become all that you became?
A revolutionary.
A revolutionary, yes.
I think the ability and the willingness to be a revolutionary is probably inherent in a personality. And I know even as a young child, if someone wasn't telling me the truth, I would insist and insist until I got the truth. And I would be punished and told to be quiet and leave it alone and for me to know and you to find out. And I would never accept that. So I think it's part of my personality to just, the truth is extremely important to me. And
Mm,
issues of justice are extremely important. That isn't true for everybody. And so that's a person has to ask them that question themselves. And then I think also, our ancestors play a role in it. And Merleau-Ponty talks about it in his work on sort of ancestral heritage and like how we anthropologically, generation to generation, have to, some people in the next generation have to finish the unfinished business of their ancestors. Yes,
fascinating, because my
fascinating.
father fled Romania and had that kind of speaking out against the system in in his personality
Mhm.
and translated it a little bit into me. But on the other hand, both my parents were raised in a kind of 1984 society where you could not speak up because you would
Right.
risk your life.
Yes,
So I feel like I have my father's side, but my mother was much younger and born later, so she had much more of a like a suppression. So I have kind of both, where it's like speak up, but also don't say anything that's gonna disturb the status quo.
exactly, exactly. And I think typically men have more permission to speak up than women.
Mm,
So,
absolutely.
you as a woman who kind of insists on the truth or speaks up about injustices, you're considered sort of a problem, where a man is
Mm,
more likely to be a hero, a revolutionary hero. So I think in the field of women's sexual and reproductive health, if you're a woman asking for those things, you're a troublemaker.
mm.
And I've
And
heard
if you
those
are a
stories.
man
You're
joining, you will have much more credibility. Like if a
ex
man comes with to a doctor's appointment, a woman is more likely to be diagnosed with, let's say,
exactly.
endometriosis.
Yes, yes. And so a
Mm,
man is more heroic if he tries to kind of change or go against the system. He's like a big thinker, an idea man, and revolutionary, whereas a woman is a problem maker. So there's that kind of, there's a prejudice really against women's voices.
mm. But tell me about when you did abortions. I didn't know that about you. That is such a fascinating, because I've heard about the women that did perform abortions,
Mhm, mhm.
and I've never
We did
spoken to a woman that did. It's always been like such a wow in my
one of
head.
those women, yes.
Yeah. But I
Well,
mean
what we
that
did,
with love.
thank you. Yes. No, we did it. What we did was called menstrual extraction, which was a vacuum aspiration
Mm,
abortion. So you could only do it like very early within like kind of just finding out you're pregnant and or just when there's a missed period.
mm,
Why did I start doing that? Well, I came from a very large family, 9 children. Every one of my aunts and uncles. I had like my father had like 8 siblings, my mother had 8 siblings. Every one of them had like 8, 7, 12 children, except one who was infertile. So like babies just were coming out all the time. And it was lovely in many ways. But I saw women's lives completely overwhelmed by childcare. And some
mm,
did better with it than others. And the men in their lives, overwhelmed with the burden of affording to care for all of
mm,
those children. So it created an undue stress. And for myself personally, my mother died when I was 7 as a result of complications. Um, she had some kind of a condition. I think it was a thyroid condition when I go into the understanding of it. And she kept having babies and having babies. And the doctor kept saying, you shouldn't be having more babies. And the priest said, you have to have babies because that's God's will.
mm,
And so they kept having babies. And then finally, a new priest came into town, and she had had another miscarriage. And the doctor said, please, you need to not be having babies. Can you ask your priest about this again? And the priest said, for God's sakes, stop this nonsense. And got a kind of a special dispensation from the bishop for her to have a hysterectomy. That was the only legitimate form of birth control for a Catholic woman, under the direction of her priest and her doctor.
mm,
So shortly after baby number 9 was born, she was given a hysterectomy. And of course, you do not do major surgery on a woman within 6 months postpartum.
mm.
And they did. And she had a pulmonary embolism and a stroke, and she died.
Oh, wow. I'm so sorry to hear that.
And that was such a shock to my family, her siblings, because they were all really vibrant, healthy people. And of course, a shock to her children, to the whole system. And as I grew older and began to understand her story, and found in her, like, she had like a little chest with all of her personal items that my dad kept, and in it was like a Catholic marriage manual with fertility awareness basics in it, and her trying to track her cycles using a rhythm method. And I began to see that, and then I kind of learned a little bit more and became curious and saw the injustice in it.
Mm,
And it made me very, very angry because I was left motherless. My siblings were
mm,
left motherless. My father never got over the grief of losing his wife and the burden of caring for 9 children from the
mm,
age of 6 months to 11 years. Can you imagine that? You can't even imagine it. It was like an instant orphanage. And so I didn't like that. It didn't feel right or fair. And then as I got older, I started to question some of the things about what the Catholic Church, their assumptions about what women were or weren't. and saw how the Judeo-Christian Islamic tradition really demonizes women. And I'm like, I don't think so. Like, I'm not a fundamental demon just because I was born female. And so, like, I started to kind of rebel around that. And then it came to the question of sex. And I was supposed to save myself for marriage, that's what you do. And I couldn't reconcile myself to that because I wanted to have sex with this lovely boy. We were in love. It was beautiful and tender. And like, how could this be a sin? It was so
Mm.
darling. And I did lots of prayers to the Virgin Mary to ask for like, her okay, and kind of got that okay. And I proceeded. And so these sorts of things came along, the injustices around that. And that, like, the boys didn't have to do housework, but the girls did. And so I've kind of got, kind of gnarly around that. Um, and the injustice that if a girl got pregnant, lots of times she was just abandoned.
Mm.
Like there was no support for her, but we weren't allowed to use birth control. And I'm
Mm.
like, that's not okay. I mean,
Yeah,
I knew lots of people who had what they call shotgun weddings where they got pregnant, they got married, but it wasn't a happy choice. So there was
mm.
like, that just didn't kind of make sense with respect to joy or happiness or choice or anything like that. And then I got involved through my own personal journey around getting birth control. Did I share some of this with you?
Yeah, yeah, you did.
Yeah, and
Mm.
so then I found my way to fertility awareness and then the home birth movement. And in the home birth movement, around the beginning of the home birth movement, we were just beginning in Canada to establish birth control clinics that would do abortion. Huge protests against, huge protests for, the very, very sort of hot political topic, including the right to give birth at home. And the
Mm.
more I kind of studied the situation, the more I heard women's stories, the more I saw women fully capable of making these complex decisions to
Mm.
have a baby or not have a baby, to have sex or not have a sex, use birth control or not use birth control, like all those. It's much more complicated for women because we carry the pregnancy.
Mm.
I was very moved by compassion and a sense of fairness. It didn't seem for me it's okay for a man to, do nothing, not want to wear a condom, not want to pull out, and yet the girl gets pregnant and she suffers everything and she's abandoned.
Mm.
And that in me became a thing of rage. And I think it was that point of rage that really gave me the energy to move forward with, working with others to form legislation, to, do the things that were necessary to speak out and to convince people. There was an extreme amount of hostility by the
Mm.
establishment, extreme amount of hostility.
Because it was illegal at the time.
It was illegal, yes.
Mm. And it had been illegal for a
No,
long
not
time.
that long, actually. It hadn't been maybe like up till like about 1950, doctors could still deliver babies at home because
Huh.
people living out in the country, they can't get into town for a birth, so the doctor would come out or some neighbor lady would help until the doctor arrived. So it wasn't a thing. But as soon as
Mm.
we started to organize ourselves and wanted laws to permit us this, we wanted, systems of education put in place, then it became a problem.
Because you were women that wanted to make a
Exactly.
change.
Yes. And of course, the women in the city that started the movement started in Edmonton, and then there was a couple of women in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and one woman on the West Coast, and eventually we kind of all got together. But the two women who started in Edmonton had been working up in the Indigenous communities far, far northern Canada, where a doctor would never bother to set foot.
Mm.
Too far, too much hassle, not enough pay. So they would send nurses up there, and nurses did everything. They did appendectomies, they did cesarean sections, they did everything, setting broken legs, plus all the nursing thing. So when these two nurses came back to the city and they were told that they couldn't do things they'd been already doing for 6 years or more, they were like, I don't think so.
Mm,
And so they kind of got a perspective on it, that of what their capabilities were and what was necessary. So that was the revolution. And I think it ties itself into women's right to have sovereignty over their body. And that figures into all sorts of things,
mm.
not just birth control and sexuality.
I think about that often because the more I study the knowledge that women had from the beginning of time that eventually became somehow instinctual in women, that includes, I mean, I guess modern day terms would use the word population control, but I mean, from the beginning of time, since women understood that sex leads to pregnancy, they have been having abortions if they knew that they couldn't
Hmm. Hmm.
bring another
Or
life into the
leaving the baby
tribe.
to, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, go
Or
ahead.
leaving the baby to die, like
Or leave, yeah.
infanticide was a legitimate practice.
Yeah. So women have all like, and I doubt anybody did it for fun, but this was like what's best for the tribe and for everyone involved at the time. And so then take and it was a skill, I guess. Anyway, it was something that women did for the tribe. And
Hmm.
taking that away from women and putting that power in the hands of men that have no idea what they're talking about. Like how when they say
Hmm.
that abortions are gonna be illegal after week 4, I think I read in the US, and week 4 is the moment of the missed period. Like you don't even have a missed period when you're week 4 because week 1 and week 2 are pre-ovulation, so it
Yeah.
doesn't even like they have no idea what they're talking about, and then they're the ones making decisions. It baffles me.
Hmm. Hmm. Yes.
And
And
then
it
people
is.
agree or disagree based on just like a hum.
Yes, I think a lot of the agree and disagree is actually not well thought out. It's kind of done reactionary. The Christian movement and the Muslim movement and the Orthodox Jewish movement are very against women having access to birth control and access to abortion and those sorts of choices.
Mm,
And and that is kind of part of the history of the Judeo-Christian movement is more and more over control over women and their bodies, and women and their bodies seen as dangerous. But before that, that wasn't the case. And so that's what we have to question. This has not been how human beings have been. This is kind of like a new thing, like 2000, max 3000 years.
mm. But I think it's also because the North American discourse takes precedence in the media.
Yes.
Because in the US especially, you have the pro-life, pro-choice kind of movement that taints the discussion. In Europe, we don't really have that. Swedish women used to go to Poland back in the day to have abortions. Polish women went to Sweden when it became illegal, and like when they changed the laws. In Romania, women had illegal abortions, and when they legalized them, they understood that women are going to have abortions regardless. It's just a question of access to safe or unsafe abortions.
Hmm.
So I'm not saying
Absolutely.
everybody is completely well read on the topic, but it's just like a different topic of conversation rather
Hmm.
than what we see on social media most of the time.
Right. But the for or against still is embedded in a Christian, Judeo-Christian ethic.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because in matriarchal societies, one would assume that like it would happen, and they
Yeah.
had local practices depending on cultures and where they lived in the world and whatnot. But I don't want to say power, but the task, I guess, still belonged to the women.
Hmm. Yeah. And I don't think there's very many really truly matriarchal societies. Pre-Judaism and then Christianity and then Islam, really the cultures were more women had their sphere, men had their sphere.
Mm,
And you were kind of, things to do with birth and nursing and menstruation and birth control, abortion, all that was really the sphere of women because it was about them and their bodies, and other men had different interests. But there wasn't like an interference. But the interference came with this idea of the monotheistic God, a male God, who would decide what was right or wrong, and that you couldn't have a personal choice.
Mm,
So Moses brought the law of God down from Mount Sinai, and this is what it was. So it was somebody outside of yourself, outside of
mm,
your community, deciding what was right or wrong. Whereas before that, and you have to kind of track through the history of humanity, you begin to see how there was much more like local and focal within a community, these sorts of decisions and what was okay and what was not okay. So you have to study different groups of people and you will see differences in how that was handled. But mostly things to do with women and women's bodies were handled by women. Things to do
mm.
with men and men's bodies and things that required that testosterone muscular thing, that was the men's sphere. Sounds like a good deal.
Mm. Yeah, I actually think it makes a lot, like it makes sense, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah. But
But
then
okay, so then, yeah.
so as soon as you get like one God and then a few men he hires to tell everybody what's right and wrong, all freedoms get lost. Also, and
Mm.
nothing sensible can be done.
But I find that interesting because I'm studying Mary Magdalene a lot. And the, I would say, not changed version of what they preached was actually, at least Mary Magdalene, to what I have found, I find that she was actually preaching something that, like a lot, it resonates a lot with menstrual cycle charting, her teachings to me. And I feel like her knowledge is very ancient feminine knowledge. So it doesn't at all resonate with the church should decide what the village does.
Hmm. Hmm.
But it is kind of how it became interpreted in what today is modern Christianity, I guess.
Hmm. Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
But
the
her
early
actual teachings
Gnostic,
were, yeah.
well, they were the early teachings of the Gnostic Christians, they weren't organized into a religion. They were just a group of people trying to follow the precepts brought forth by Christ, which is much more egalitarian, person-centered, and that sort of thing. Yeah.
Mm, mm. But so you found yourselves in a time and a place on Earth
Yes.
where it was not so. But was it a conscious choice to go into the illegalities, or did you kind of just find yourself in that?
No, it was a conscious choice. I knew it was illegal, and I chose to do what was illegal because it felt that the law was not just,
Mm,
that the actions that we were doing were just. And
mm,
so, yeah, I'm all about disobeying the law for
mm,
reasons of conscience.
absolutely, absolutely. I obviously have nothing to say about that. I completely agree. Because because there are laws in parts of the world that don't make sense.
Yeah.
And then following them to the detriment of all women and men, of course, is because there will be children born that have nobody to care for them. And this is what I know. I know this is going to trigger a lot of discussions. This is not the point. My point was going to ask about your experience, because then also at a certain point, the laws changed.
Hmm.
And you all played a role in this, right? And what happened in the, I guess, collective consciousness? What happened from when you got into the field to how it all shifted?
Ooh, there were many letters to Parliament. There were many sort of stories of women's lives presented. There were many, like, kind of parades of protest and just pushing and trying to prove things. I sat on the Maternal Health and Welfare Committee in Alberta for a couple of years, trying to convince the College of Physicians and Surgeons why it was okay to give home birth or to have a birthing center that could
Mm,
accommodate a more comfortable birthing experience attached to a hospital. And it was about really educating them. And a lot of it was, well, this is what they're doing in England. It's like, it's not a big deal. And this is what they're doing here. And oh, by the way, most of the babies born in the world are born at home at that point in time. It's like,
mm,
the population in those places is growing faster than the population here. And just
mm.
kind of proving safety and efficacy of the methods, trying to petition for standardization of education of midwives. And it was just really, going up against prejudicial ideas and inviting them to rethink things. And some were more malleable with respect to being willing to rethink, and others were completely rigid. But little by little, we were able to change. And ironically, there was one obstetrician and gynecologist who maybe he didn't feel he was popular enough or a big enough figure. So he made himself the hero of natural childbirth in the city. And all the women fell in love with him. And so he became the hero who set up the first birthing center. And even though he was against home birth, his efforts to change attitudes actually helped us.
Hmm.
So
But see, so again, we have that when a
it's the
man
male
does
voice has,
something,
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's
so grudgingly, I'm grateful to him because if he hadn't agreed, all the other obstetricians might have gone like, no, 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 no. And he was
mm.
just a senior enough and just powerful enough, like he was head of obstetrics, that he had influence. So I think when you're a revolutionary, you need people in positions of power on your side. Yeah.
But so your focus was more the home births.
My focus was the home birth, because the hospitals were not offering anything close to what a woman might want with respect to natural childbirth and non-interference. But we were also at the same time petitioning for birthing, like birthing centers or separate birthing rooms within the obstetrical department where women could have, their partners with them, a family member. We weren't doing like water births at the time, but that, they like minimum interference. The baby could be put on the mother's breast right away, skin to skin contact. I know these are revolutionary ideas.
I'm reading a book right now by Millie Hill. I think it's called Give Birth Like a Feminist.
Uh-huh.
And in it, she talks a lot about the language of permission and how so many women she's talked to said that, well, I wasn't allowed to, or my doctor didn't let me, or I didn't know it was an option. So maybe they have a C-section that they didn't intend on having. The child is not put on their, like, they don't have the skin-to-skin contact. They don't meet the baby for more than 24 hours. And when they're asked about it, it's just like, well, I wasn't allowed to, or their birth plan was treated as like a kind of like if it fits the system, we can give her something as like a cherry on top. But the women are completely disregarded.
Exactly, exactly. And part of our work with women was to educate them that you're actually paying the doctor's wage. He is
Mm,
working for you. You don't have to please them. But when you look at the history of women, part of the whole feminist movement is to allow ourselves permission, not ask
mm,
husband, not ask church, not ask boss for permission, but to allow ourselves permission to live a life that is meaningful for us. So there was a lot of education exactly around that language. You don't have to ask for permission.
mm.
He is your employee. And that was like radical for them. I see my video is jumping. I'm not sure why, but I am not jumping. Sorry about that.
It's okay. Technology. No, but I do find it fascinating because I think that is what's taken me the longest to revolutionize against like I feel like I've been my own jailer in this process.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's like nobody's actually stopping me, and yet I find it so
Well,
difficult.
you are being stopped, but we understand the jail very subtly. So, um, we are raised from being a little girl as to
Mm,
this is what a little girl is. This is how a little girl speaks. She doesn't play rough. She doesn't tumble with her skirts going over her legs. little boys can do that. So there's all these subtle ways in which we are conditioned to be more polite, quieter, ask for less.
Mm.
I would say that's kind of global. I'm just going to turn my video off for a second. We're going to get the blue rose,
Mm-hmm.
which is the kind of the cover of my book. And then I'll come back to you in a minute when maybe we'll stop doing that. Um, so the question of permission is really part of the feminist movement. It's an age-old problem where you had to ask permission to marry, you had to ask permission for anything pretty much.
Mm.
Right?
Mm.
And so a woman who would just take her life into her own hands was considered problematic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think of that. I don't know if you've heard the analogy with the baby elephant. Usually, apparently, when they train baby elephants for the circus, they tie their legs around like an iron pole or something, and the elephant tries to escape so many times that eventually it gives up. And then when they're all grown up, they can just tie them in like a little wooden stick, and the elephant is still not going to try to escape because it's been so trained. It's
Yeah,
basically keeping itself there,
exactly.
but
And
it's
so
not
it
actually
became
stuck.
it isn't true. And we also, when we step outside of what is expected of us, we risk losing family connections, friend connections. We risk losing respect.
Mm,
People might not want to kind of deal with us. So it's a very risky business.
mm,
And I've lost many friends and colleagues over my insistence around certain rights for women. I'm just sort of seen as a bit too much.
mm, mm,
And I'm not ranting, I'm not screaming, I'm not even doing big things, but just that, that I would bring. I remembered like in my training as to be a psychologist, the kind of the party line was the child is messed up because the mother failed.
mm,
And I'm listening to this for a few weeks and I'm like, hold it, there's something wrong. And then I asked in class, I said, this is what I'm hearing, that the mother didn't mother well enough, and so the child is this and that and this and that. I said, but what I'm noticing is each of these case studies, there's an absent father. So how is the
mm,
absent father part of what's happening with this child? And collectively, men and women of my whole group, 28 people, and my professor all went, oh my God, Geraldine.
mm.
Now, I don't think that was a
No,
problematic
I was gonna
question.
say it's so obvious.
It's a very
Eh,
important question, but
Yeah.
I was immediately a troublemaker.
Huh. But it is true, though, that fathers have been absent and not necessarily willingly. Like they've been kept out of birthing rooms, they've been kept out of the conversations, they've been like they have no idea that their wives are traumatized from birth or
Hmm.
what have you. And I have this theory because the more I study, like, there's this graphic, right, of the hormones of a woman's life phases with like estrogen tending to go, obviously going up in puberty and then in pregnancy, postpartum, and menopause. And because I study the neuroendocrinology, I
Hmm.
see how these hormonal shifts are going to change the brain, right? Like
Hmm.
cyclically in puberty, you're going to think more about sex and having kids, and then you're not going to want to, and then you're going to want to, and it's like a, let's say, 28 cycle. And then during pregnancy, you're going to think about certain things, you're going to have other fears, and so on. But men have been taught to relate to women in puberty and right after puberty. And they have no idea what a woman experiences in childbirth or during a
Hmm.
miscarriage or abortion or in menopause or whatever, right? So they're kind of like excluded from all that is being a woman,
Hmm. Hmm.
yet they're supposed to be intimate partners and also the decision makers
Hmm.
of women. And like you said, a lot of your work was trying to like convince men in power of what's right. But if they don't also have a father that was present, I'm talking about these men in power, had
Hmm.
they had a father that was present with the mother during these life changes, they would have seen what that entails for men and women.
Possibly, yes. If it was
Mm,
discussed, possibly, yes, exactly.
mm.
Yeah.
So I think, I don't know, I think men lose a lot by not seeing that modeled, I think.
Yes. And also men are really, they're given permission to see really women in a very pornified way. They're not
Mm,
encouraged to see, what a milky breasted woman is all about,
mm,
what it looks like, or how she might feel. So there's
mm.
a kind of young men, or their view of what a woman is gets skewed by that. And if he's an arrogant person, he's not going to be willing to be educated otherwise. If he's not so arrogant, then maybe him and his partner can work that out or talk about that. So there's that problem, the objectification of women.
Talk a little bit more about that because I'm getting right now the image of that woman that you were talking about being abandoned if she became pregnant.
Yes,
And I
exactly.
feel like then there's also a man that was absent.
Yes, exactly. I mean, okay, this is a bit radical, but what I say to men you are always fertile.
Mm,
You don't want your partner to get pregnant. You have no business having sex with her because you control the factor. And they're like completely shocked. Like it had never occurred to them that they are the one who is more responsible than the woman.
of course.
Yeah.
But
But that's
I hadn't
considered,
seen it.
it's radical because women are the ones who are always worrying about, will I get pregnant? Well, you know what? Your partner doesn't have, I mean, we want to have sex, of course, I get it. They
Mm,
both want to have sex, but they have to think about that ultimately he is the responsible one because he has all those little living swimmers in him. And yet
every day.
they will refuse to use condoms. They will say they'll pull out and they don't. And or they insist that the woman go on hormonal birth control. And to me, that's an issue of justice. She's fertile like this many days. He's fertile 24/7 from puberty like onward. Like, how
Mm,
is that fair that he doesn't have to hold any responsibility? And then if she gets pregnant and it's inconvenient for him, he can leave. And a woman can leave too. She can give birth and adopt out the baby or have an abortion, but she's always vilified. A man
mm,
is never vilified for leaving his children in the same way a woman is vilified. A man is
mm.
never vilified for insisting a woman have an abortion in the same way that a woman is vilified. So that's a huge point of injustice.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. Which
But
is
so
why I
is
taught
there,
my sons fertility awareness.
that's amazing.
So they
That is
would know.
amazing. Mm. I have personally, because I never went on birth control, I had to have like a, I don't want to say a higher standard, but just like a different standard. Like I did not have sex with men without a condom in my years of sexual activity. So the men that I did have sex with learned about fertility awareness to the degree-ish that I knew about it at the
Mhm.
time. So I have seen men being interested in this.
Yes, exactly.
And then I talk to other women or other men, and they just aren't. And for me, that's just mind-blowing because the men in my life usually have some kind of idea what I do, you know? So it's not like a difficult concept for men to grasp
Not at all.
necessarily.
Not at all. No. Nor is it a difficult concept for women to grasp, but we're afraid to speak about it because we're afraid that person might not want to be with us. Like it's like that conversation about birth control and fertility awareness is more intimate than any other sexual thing you'll do.
Mm,
It's the hardest conversation. That and oh, by the way, we should check if we have STIs before we have sex.
Mm.
That's always my recommendation. And people are like, 3 months into the relationship, they decide to get tested. It's like it doesn't. So it's like there's certain conversations that are too intimate and too, what's the word? Like too real.
Vulnerable. Mm.
Vulnerable but real. It's like you can engage in sex and it's kind of like a fantasy and we get caught up in the emotion of it. And we can't bring it down to earth and talk about, sex is dangerous. People
Mm.
get pregnant, they don't want to get pregnant. People get disease, they don't want to get disease. Like it's actually a dangerous activity.
We were talking the other week, actually, in a class in Justice. We were talking about what it means to be. No, it wasn't in Justice, sorry, it was in a different container about fertility awareness. We were talking about what it means to be ready to have sex. And because I wasn't going to go on birth control, I had to really sit down with myself and think about this for years. And obviously, it's a topic that's a little bit too long for today, but generally speaking, like, am I capable of handling the consequences? What happens if this? What happens in that? With that, am I prepared for this? Like, I saw it from like all points of views. And I think that that is something that should be included in sexual education and also parental education.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. But then you see, if you have young people who have like some trauma history, some emotional issues around bonding and abandonment, those are going to be nearly impossible areas to explore because they're looking for comfort, they're looking for closeness. They don't want to risk that by asking questions that might take them out of that intimacy. So it's very complex. Like theoretically, rationally, it seems, yeah, we should have this conversation from a very young age. But if you think of how complex the psyche of any individual is, you have to ask, maybe they're not ready for sex, maybe they're ready for sex, but what makes them ready? What makes them not ready? And it's not just the information about birth control. It's about, can I handle the complexity of emotional attachment?
And what if they can't? Because there are
Well,
people that cannot that still have sex.
well, of course, because they're desperate to bond with somebody, because they feel like so little about themselves. They don't know how to connect with themselves. They don't know how to connect with love without going into sex. And so they have to have sex to feel like they're whole or that they're connected. So to tell them you shouldn't be doing this until you've thought it out, you're like a lunatic to them.
Mm. But
I
isn't
mean,
that
this isn't
also,
just young people. This is with full grown adults. And even in their 60s or 70s, you run into this challenge.
mm, but isn't this also, I don't want to say more typical of men, but it is common with men. At least maybe I have my own experience because I speak to so many women that do chart their menstrual cycle and are
Hmm.
trying to have these conversations, right? This is why I also try to include men in my YouTube videos or in my courses. I've tried to teach men what the menstrual cycle is and what fertility awareness means and cycling. And there is like a resistance more in the men, but of course it can also be in my group of followers, or maybe, I don't know.
Yeah, I think it depends on the individual man, like how threatened he might feel by a woman
Mm,
having knowledge about her body. He might feel threatened that he might not be able to have sex when he wants. He might be threatened by it being too complicated. He maybe just wants to have sex and not have anything else going on. So again, you have to get into the individual sort of dynamics of the couple. And if you're working with a group of women that are already charting their cycles, you've already you've shifted the whole, I got to get rid of this. You've already shifted the whole sort of consciousness of the group because women, there are women I've known who they just do not want to go anywhere near fertility awareness. That's just like gross, obscene, too much work, yuck. For them, it's just don't want to go there, don't want to do it. So there's a relationship to their body, to their self, to their sovereignty that is very different than women who want to know that, want to relate to their body, want to have body sovereignty. So it's complicated. I don't think we can generalize any of
Mm.
this because we have to look at the individual.
But so what happens then when a group of women want a group of doctors to understand what fertility awareness means, and this said group of doctors are men or in positions of power?
Yes, well, I think we can well imagine that would happen unless the man himself understands fertility awareness, understands the value for the woman, understands the value for the relationship. He's going to think it's hogwash and he's going to think about the statistics of preventing pregnancy. That's what he's going to think about. And, Dr. Duane, Marguerite Duane,
Mm,
has dealt with this a lot with her group because they're about educating medical professionals to be open to the idea of fertility awareness, educating women at different levels of fertility awareness, like the 2-day method. Very, very simple. You know, was today the same as yesterday or the day before or not? Like really simple, because for some people, the introduction to this information has to be simple and easy and not overwhelm them. If you
mm,
think, Ellie, about how many women are disassociated from their body, eating disorders, body dysmorphia, you know, how they might pornify themselves so they'll be acceptable and their real self and their real desires are hidden because they're kind of gambling for the male gaze or
mm,
whatever, could be the female gaze, but they're not themselves. They don't have a sense of self. So how can someone who's not living in their body, who's dissociated from their body, even begin to think about doing fertility awareness? How can they even begin to ask for what they want in a sexual relationship? They just let it happen.
mm.
So it's not just a medical problem, it's not just a teaching problem. It's a problem that is embedded in the complexity of the human psyche.
This is this is such a fascinating insight. How, like, I'm gonna have to take some time afterwards to really contemplate this because there's so many things right now in my brain that are kind of just like adding up and making sense, like a lot of strings tying together. But then it's just like I guess a collective sexual unawareness, but of everything that is sexuality.
Yeah, exactly. But it's also, there's a collective unawareness about health in general, like eating well, caring for our body. Like it's very difficult for human beings to really um, commit themselves to a healthy relationship to their corporality. Most of us want to kind of get up and above it because it's too scary, it's too vulnerable. No pain, no gain. Oh, that doesn't really matter. People joke about eating junk food, they joke about drinking alcohol. Ha 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 ha. But it isn't ha ha ha. It's a
Mm,
profound disrespect for the physical gift of our body. But the physical gift of our body it then puts us in the position of having to deal with desires and bodily fluids and complicated things like disease and like we would rather just not think about our body. I'm going to try the camera again. Hopefully I don't freeze in some terrible position. Sorry, audience.
this is so interesting because I come from an eating disordered background. I had no idea about body literacy. Like I would go hours when I was working in the emergency room without using the restroom. Like I wouldn't feel hunger anymore. I wouldn't feel the need to go to the toilet. Like I was completely dissociated. But on the other hand, I had a relatively healthy relationship to sex because it
Mhm.
was introduced to me in an age appropriate manner during my life. And the relationship to sex was always different than the relationship to my body, but I didn't have a concept. I didn't even have a concept of how I was relating to my body. Like I
Mhm.
didn't like as it relates to just like weight and health at the time, I just hated my body.
Yeah. So then that begs the question, if we hate our body, can we describe our sexual experience as a good experience?
I wasn't having sex yet. I
Uh-huh.
waited until I actually changed my relationship to my own body. But I remember that part of my life when I really hated my body. And I'm very happy that I didn't have sex at the time because I had information about menstruation and sex and the awareness to wait until I was ready and whatever. So that was the time when I was learning about what that meant and
Mhm.
but so I don't even know where I'm getting with this. It's just I think that's where we left off last time. That just like a one piece of it, like how I said last time that just the fact that I knew that I should know when my menstruation starts led me to be able to decline birth control when I was talking to my doctor because I knew I had regular periods and I therefore undiagnosed myself with PCOS. That's another story. Uh, but then just also some knowledge about sex led me to make different choices
Mhm. Mhm.
as it related to sex. And I just cannot imagine how, I don't know how much differently I would have acted with everything in my life had I had all of this knowledge at an age appropriate time. And the same thing about sex. Like I no doubt would have done things differently.
Exactly. Yes, so definitely I would agree that when we have knowledge about our body, it changes everything around our choices. And if we have had the good fortune of growing up without our body being something that we hate, without our body being shamed, without our
Mm,
choices being shamed, then it bodes a much better outcome. But if we've grown up with shame, if we've grown up with just the fundamental shame of being born a woman,
mm,
that's a red car, man. You're out of the game.
mm,
You know? And
mm,
um, so again, it's unfortunately, I wish the psychological community would get together with the medical community and really look how these things work psychophysiologically.
mm,
Um, because like I don't know any psychologist who talks about their sex with their patients or their physical health. They're talking about like mom and dad and how I was raised in trauma, but what is the person's now, here and now relationship to sex? What is their here and now relationship to their body? Like it kind of
mm,
it's too icky to go there, to touch it.
mm.
And the medical community doesn't want to go into the psychology of it, but you can't really separate it. And
And I
so
see sex as a sign of health, like healthy
yeah,
sex drive is a sign of
absolutely.
health. Yeah.
Yes, yes. We should be having sex. Sex is fun. Sex makes us happy. It's a good thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
And and
yet we
and
are
the loss of
so
sex
neurotic
drive.
about sex. Everyone
Yeah.
is so neurotic.
Yeah. And a loss of sex drive is oftentimes a sign of disease,
Yes, yes, exactly.
like vascular disease or depression or I don't know, diabetes or whatever. Like the sex drive can be the first thing to go. And yet, as doctors, we never ask about these things.
Yeah, you should ask about sex drive. And
Yeah.
psychologists should ask about sex drive. And I talk to my colleagues all the time. Do you ask about sex? Well, no, we don't do that. It's like, It's like the single most important question. I mean, I don't like the first visit, I don't go right for the jugular on that, but it gets there within the first little bit because, are you doing it? Is it working? Do you like it? All these things. Are you in your body? Like those questions matter hugely.
Yeah. Okay, I could talk about this forever, as you know, and we're going to have to continue. Are you still with me?
I am still with you. Did I
Okay.
freeze?
Yeah, you froze a little bit. I could talk about this forever. I really, really could because I also think that sex is, in a way, the connection between everything. Like the mind and the body,
Yes,
you and the other person, religion and shame, pleasure and whatever. Like it's the core, right? I think human sexuality has been the driving force of the evolution of human consciousness.
absolutely. I would agree. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I think that's why it has been so controlled and suppressed. So I think there's a
hmm
reason.
hmm And necessarily so. It needs a little bit of curating. It can't be
Mm,
just, yeah.
fair enough. But okay, no, we've already been talking for almost an hour. I'm
We
going
will
to,
come back.
we will
We
come
will come.
back, yes. But to wrap it up, for a revolutionary young women such as myself, what is the advice?
Uh, I think be brave, speak out, but
Mm,
know, but learn to know who has the heart to receive what you have to say and who has the ears to hear you. And, we need to speak contemplatively, like in an invitational way. We can't just say, you're a stupid idiot, you don't know anything. Like this is going to close the doors. So learning some like contemplative ways to dialogue or nonviolent communication and to really think out our what we want to say or what we want to change before we go about it. Like if we kind of go on like with a house on fire, we're probably going to offend so many people they won't want to listen to us. So we have to, I think, satisfy ourselves with contributing to a long number of generations before us, slowly, slowly rolling the stone of evolution before us.
that's so beautiful.
Yeah, yeah,
Mm. Okay, so I will practice that on YouTube because this is where I've been a little bit scared of speaking.
yeah. And,
So I'll,
it's okay to say, I'm scared to say this. I know this might be controversial, but I feel it's important to say.
mm,
Just like my questions to my colleagues about, well, what about the absent father? And they're like, well, I can't take their reaction personally, because
mm.
they're very invested in what they believe. But asking the question sometimes is the beginning of the revolution for them. So ask the question.
I love that. I love that because I have a lot of questions that I've been holding in.
Yeah, no, you're going to get ulcers if you keep holding them in. Ask away, Ellie.
I'm gonna get ulcers, and also I end up being disappointed with the medical community when actually there's good there too. But right now I just see it through the lens of like, you don't care about women. And
Yes.
maybe they would if they would just like be invited to ponder certain questions.
Yes. Well, we cannot change people by force. We can only
Mm,
change them by invitation. And so, we have to ask the questions, we have to speak our truth. And if someone's not ready to listen, there I go again. If someone's not ready to listen, then we have to let it go.
mm,
We can't exhaust ourselves. Yeah, we cannot force people to change.
yeah.
And then we can, in our wicked evenings, we can burn little effigies of them to get rid of the upset.
Ah, I liked what you said though. Let those who have ears like to speak to those who want to
Yeah,
listen. Yeah.
yeah.
Mm. Okay. we will
Okay, my dear.
conclude for today. I would love to hear you speak more about this, but I'll see you again next
We will
time.
continue. Yes. Okay. Bye, Ellie.
Thank you
Lovely
so
to
much.
speak with
Thank
you.
you. Bye.
Bye.